Hello, good evening, good evening. Hello, good evening. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's 120-minute PowerPoint presentation on the auction tomorrow. No, only kidding. Thank you for, hello? Thank you for joining us this evening for Styled Timeless Watches and How to Wear Them. A panel discussion about two very interesting subjects to me, style and watches. And when the organizers of tonight's panel discussion got together and they were talking about who they were going to find to host, they thought, well, we've got this extremely interesting panel of people to talk about this auction and this partnership between Mr. Porter, Phillips, and the Rake. And they thought, well, we have all these interesting people on this panel. We can't have anyone interesting host. So that's how I got here. My name's Michael Williams. I'm the least interesting man on the stage here. And I'd love to first introduce these gentlemen to my left, and then we can have a nice conversation about everything that you're seeing in this room, all these wonderful clothes and amazing watches. So to my left, Aurel Bacs, the man behind the auction tomorrow, watch expert, aficionado's aficionado, and the person that, if there's any reference numbers, important details, we're all going to look to him because you'll have all the exact, perfect, intelligent information on all the watches we're going to see. To his left is Toby Bateman, the head guy, the managing director at Mr. Porter, the person we all look to for all our style advice. And to his left is Wei Koh, the founder of the Rake magazine, and we probably look at his Instagram feed and say, why couldn't our lives turned out like his life? Although there's a good crowd here, that might not be true. There's probably some interesting people in the audience that could rival what Wei's got going on.
I'm sure. Surpass it.
So I'll try to limit my own speaking so you can be exposed to the true inspirational gentleman to my left. Just to kick things off, it seems like at a certain point, watches and style were working on two parallel tracks, not interacting with each other, sort of functioning independently in their own worlds, separate from each other. Maybe this first question I'll ask you, Toby. Have you seen the convergence, or was there a moment when you saw the convergence of watches and style come together? And what did you think about it? And were you surprised to sort of see those two worlds bend together?
Right. Thank you for the generous introduction, Michael. I'm not sure there's been a single moment where we've seen the worlds of watches and style converge, but the two have certainly converged, and I think it's down to two things. I think it's a generational aspect, and I think it relates to the internet. And by generational, what I mean is I think that people have become a little less conspicuous about what they're wearing on their wrist. In the past 10 years, I would say, there is less bling going on in the large part, and I think that younger people particularly are understanding the nuances of vintage watches, and they enjoy the interaction that they then get with like-minded individuals who spot a certain reference on someone's wrist, and you both kind of quiet nod to a like-minded soul, and then there's the internet and the communication aspect, and that has just bred this sort of nerd-like following, and I think businesses like Hodinkee are largely responsible for that, and I'm certainly kind of grateful and have enjoyed the part that they've played in that transition, because men are we're nerdy. We love facts. We like to know when a watch was released originally, how long it was produced for, how many iterations of that watch, and I'm sure that this room is full of people that can go through all of these watches here and give you sort of chapter and verse on that kind of detail. And in fact, Wei and Aurel are part of that club. So that's my view on how watches have. I didn't really describe how they've converged with style. I've just sort of talked about how they've, how in my mind watches have become popular. But I think that style has just been part of that, and I think those people involved, the people that are online and the people that care about what they're wearing on their wrist, by definition, they care about style, and it's an important part of their outfit.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like it's those details where people are really interested in what they're wearing, and it extends to sort of every aspect of your life. I mean, how do you see it, Aurel? Do you look at fashion and look at craftsmanship and style, and then look at watches and see them as of the same mind? Or
I think that a watch is an extremely personal, even sometimes intimate statement that we make about ourselves. In this room, I don't know, 200 people. Imagine we would put all the watches in one pot and you then leave with another one. And I wonder how many would be unhappy about their trade, not in monetary value, but just like, that's not me. The Royal Oak doesn't look good on me. I'm the Panerai guy, and I'm the Speedmaster guy, and I'm the Submariner guy, and the Nautilus guy, and the Reverso, and so forth. And the same, of course, goes for the way we dress. I see extraordinary, smart-looking people in this room from where I sit here, but if we would switch every jacket and every trousers and shoes, nobody would go home saying, wow, that's me. So that very personal statement that we make without even realizing is the way we are. And that is why in the morning, and it happens to me, I'm thinking, okay, who am I meeting today? Where am I going? Is it in Naples it's warm, in London it's rainy, but do I meet a member of the royal family? Do I meet a football player? Am I meeting an artist? That's also part of what I choose for my wrist and what I choose to wear. There are practical elements, and there's a lot of psychology going into this.
Yeah.
And the watch is, and I know it's been said a million times, the only jewel a man can wear. I'm a little bit sick of that statement, but it's true. It's not dressing. Cufflinks, I think, are not as common anymore as they used to be 50 years ago, or studs. So there's not really that much left, and the watch is really a very important part of, I think, most of us here in the room when we leave in the morning. What do we pick for the day?
Yeah, and it, the statement it makes about who you are, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, just like what you decide to put on your wrist, and what that says about who you are as a person. And when you meet people, I mean, do you take that same approach? Do you think about?
Well, I mean, if I could just retreat a little bit to your original question. I actually feel that style and a love for watches are completely aligned. I think it was Proust that said style is a manifestation of the universe that is hidden to others but is seen by you. So you're trying to make manifest something that's internal through your choice in clothing, through your choice in watch. It's kind of the same impulse. But we can do an experiment. So let's take, for example, some random person in the audience. Let's take Johannes, for example, right? I mean, yes. So I don't know if you guys know him, but incredible entrepreneur, incredible style icon. Do you mind standing and turning around? And look at him, beautifully dressed. Okay, I shall forewarn you not to look directly into his eyes because he's so handsome that whether you're a man or a woman, you may become pregnant just by looking into his eyes. So,
this is what you get for
now,
sitting in the
Johannes, let me
front
ask you a
row.
question. Are watches important to you?
Very much so.
Exactly, and I think that whether it was Valentino, I'm so sorry.
Should he take my seat?
But whether it was Rudolph Valentino and the Sheik, who was so enamored by his Cartier tank that even though from a period perspective that watch shouldn't have been in that film, he refused to take it off. Whether you're talking about Fred Astaire's Tongue with the beautiful Arabic luminous numerals, whether you're talking about Gianni Agnelli with his affection for his World Timer and his Polprof from Omega, all of these impulses are essentially the same. I think that for guys who love style, that they always love watches as well. And I'm inclined to agree with anything Johannes says.
Yeah.
And do you want to respond to Aurel's comment about jewelry and the watch being the only jewel that a man could wear.
No, I mean, I think the watch is, again, probably the most intimate part of your wardrobe in that, well, I sleep with my watches on, and I actually select watches that I know will put me in a good frame of mind when I'm sleeping. But it is your constant companion. It is the only entity that is traveling and functioning with you throughout your life. It doesn't consume any more energy than the energy that you impart upon it through winding it or by wearing it if it's automatic. And that's an incredibly intimate relationship. So for me, watches are style, but there's a romance to them as well.
Yeah. I think maybe, to me it jumps out where it seems like there's a lot more interest in, a watch auction to this scale, or, there's Toby, what you were speaking of earlier, there's just so much interest online. And, we were talking earlier today too, just about younger people coming in and being interested in watches, and just the whole universe, and maybe those worlds aren't converging, it's just extending out to different types of people. And, I think people, the world has become a very complicated place, and, in a way, like watches are very, they're easy to understand, it's simple, and it's, it's this analog mechanical device that you don't have to, invest a lot of thinking into.
And the reason that means more now is that it's such a fast-moving world full of technology.
Exactly.
That owning a vintage watch is literally you're owning a piece of history, because it's never going to be made again. There are only so many of those watches ever made, and if you're lucky enough to own one, if there were 2,000 made, or if there were 100 made, or if there were only 10 made,
yeah,
that I think is becoming more meaningful to everyone in a world that's so dominated by technology, and technology that becomes out of date so fast.
Yeah, I think that's Aurel was mentioning this to us earlier when we were discussing it. But what's so interesting is how the younger generation has been completely captivated by vintage watches. And to some degree, I think it's almost because that you have this constant onslaught of technology all the time, which is also technology that is engineered to become anachronistic. So whether it's that phone or it's that operating system, within 6 months, it's no longer relevant. And the great thing about watches, and in particular vintage watches, is that they are a statement of perenniality. And I think that's what's so charming about them. In addition to that, and I think Aurel was the first person to put this forward, was they were all created to be uniform products initially, but time has aged them to create a uniqueness about each of them. Like, we love tropical dials, for example, but a tropical dial cannot be engineered. It has to happen naturally. And I think, Phillips and Aurel were the first ones to put that forward. Would you agree, Aurel?
I've never thought that I was the first one to put that forward, but the uniqueness is I think what's the most interesting part of a vintage watch.
Yes.
Some collectors don't like a presentation inscription. I find it absolutely charming. And whenever I turn a watch around and it says, "With love from Dad and Mom," I mean, I just, within a second, I'm sort of zooming away, and I start thinking, where is Dad and Mom today? And where is Johnny or Jimmy, the recipient of the watch? Even a scratch. A scratch on a watch is a little bit like a scar on our skin. I don't have that many scars yet, but those that I remember, this is from a dog that bit me. Whenever I look at my right hand, I remember that dog when I was 8 years and he bit me. And it tells a story. It reminds of a special moment. A scar to some extent, or a scratch on a watch, actually means you got away, you were lucky. I think that dimension of telling a story is what fascinates me much more than, with all due respect to smartwatches that are beautifully boxed and brand new.
Sure.
One is like the other. There's just no, there's the human element missing. And some age better than others. I think it's the same with human beings. Yes, and you can restore a watch, like with human beings, and some restorations are better than others, like with human beings. But I have to say, when we look at the car in Pebble Beach, there's, since a few years, and it wasn't there when it started, best in class for preservation class. Mm-hmm. So you see a Gullwing Mercedes really in pieces, but that's the way it was made, and we celebrate that as much as we can. I'm not against servicing watches. I'm not even against repairing watches. And if it's done with sympathy, the restoration, I think that's it takes away some of its charm, but of course I understand nobody wants like a completely rusted watch on their wrist.
It's also, there's a certain skill to restoring something beautifully in a way that, you know, conveys the, you know, original intent of the, you know, if it's an automobile or a watch, and I think there's some value to that. I also think it's, you know, I think it's interesting that you must deal with so many different types of collectors, and sort of everyone brings a different perspective to why they're involved. And, you know, some people it's the, you know, looking for that one specific, very special piece that, you know, has some, you know, importance to them. Or some people, you know, don't want the perfectly restored watch, and some people want the totally, you know, messed up, crazy piece that, you know, there's so many different styles. Like, are you, you know, how do you sort of navigate all those different personalities?
I don't think there is one collector who's a clone of another collector. Some collectors go by brand. Some collectors go by functions, like just chronographs, just moon phases. Other go by shape, by metal, just steel watches, just rectangular watches. To me personally, everything is permitted. And that means if the watch makes you happy, if you feel that's the right thing for you, go for it. I would never, I mean, there's a funny anecdote, and I have to be careful that the gentleman is not here with us tonight, but it stays here in this room, okay?
And on the live stream.
So an extremely, a wonderful collector with an extraordinary sharp eye for quality. He owns one of the absolutely most impressive collections of Patek Philippe complications. And one day, and that was here in New York at the Winning Icons auction we had here last November, we had a beautiful perpetual calendar by Audemars Piguet. And he tries it on and says, "Gosh, that is so beautiful, I love it." Great, I mean, here's a match. I mean, I often actually think of myself more like a matchmaker than anything else. And I thought, yeah, we're fine. And he says, "You know, I can't buy it." "Why not?" "Well, it's an Audemars Piguet." Like, "Well, what's wrong with that?" "Well, I'm collecting Patek Philippe." I said, "But who doesn't allow you to do that? Your mom? Your boss?" and he really struggled. And I tried to convince him, and he started like in the 1980s with watch collecting, so he's already seriously experienced. I said, "But what stops you from permitting, why don't you treat yourself? Just," and I saw him suddenly in that kind of chained, and I wanted him to break free, and then eventually he did participate, but he didn't win a lot. But it was a very interesting experience to see that journey, and I have the same problem. I mean, how many times do I see a great jacket, a great sweater, and I'm like, "Oh, I would love to wear that because Gianni Agnelli looked so good in it," but then I'm in the front of the mirror. That's not me. Well, who says so?
Yeah.
Well, I say so. So, fair enough. Everyone has to find their own line, their own direction. I don't think it's a good idea if you just do what your fellow collectors and friends do. Keep your personality in there.
I'm someone that's really drawn to collectors. I like people that, you know, focus on things, or maybe it's a lot of different things, and, you know, they're just, I feel like the collector's mind is very unique, and I'm very much drawn to people that have that sort of obsession. And often for me, it's you know, to celebrate that by seeing it or being around them, or, you know, where I don't have to participate. But this collector maybe, you know, by limiting themselves to some degree, they sort of, you know, help control you know, the mania maybe that they have in their mind for collecting in a good way. You know, it keeps them focused.
If I may add, I don't want to monopolize this, but one thing I see though as a trend, we're moving away from volume and we're moving constantly towards quality. Many collectors in the 80s were trying to gather as many pieces as possible and ended up with 200, 500, 1,000 watches. And now I see more and more collectors saying it's better to have one really nice piece that means something to me than 5 or 10 that I never look at, that I never wear, that I know they're not great. And I think that's a positive direction. It's a good direction that we all sort of treat ourselves with better pieces, and I think the same applies probably for a wardrobe, if you had to advise your clients. Volume does not make happy.
No, but buy cheap, buy twice, I think is what my mum says. We're probably not talking about cheap, though. We're talking about selection, aren't we? And I think it's the meaning of the pieces. And to your point, an analogy that I was thinking about when you were just talking was, my father owns an old MG. Okay, it's a 1950 MG TD midget. Now he bought it when he was 18, and he's now 73. So he bought it in 68. No,
53. 1963.
1963. You're right. Yeah, there you go. Maths is not my strong point. Clothes, not maths.
Well, 55 years ago.
So, and the point about this car and the analogy that I wanted to draw was that, you know, he's owned this car his entire life. It's his pride and joy, and he stripped it down like 2 or 3 times. I remember when I was a kid, like the whole of the garage floor was just covered in parts from his car. And it's just been his hobby his entire life. Now, the thing is, I've got 2 brothers, right? So there's 3 of us. So who's going to get the car? Okay? I mean, I'm middle, so I don't know what that makes my odds. But whoever gets that car, of course, that's a truly meaningful thing. Yeah. And I think that it's very much the same, with watches. Not necessarily collecting from an auction, but I think that once you are a collector, or once watches mean something to you, and you have a selection you're going to keep, and you want to pass them down, that's what you're passing down. You're passing down your own passion, to your kids.
I actually think that's a good segue. You mentioned something earlier. So I live in California. We don't live too far from Malibu, and so occasionally there's that scare that your house could burn down. And twice we've gone through this little exercise of like, oh my gosh, the house could burn down. Let's get all our stuff. And so we were talking about it earlier, and to your point, it's like there's certain things that are just more meaningful to you than others, and maybe it's not the most valuable watch that you own, but if your house is on fire, what is the watch you're going to choose?
One.
You have to get your wife and daughter and dog and pictures.
I mean, only one watch is what I can say.
Yeah.
They're all next to each other. You can just.
Let's say his hands are full. He's got. What if? I bet Wei will probably be out back though. Just I'm here to help. I smelled smoke.
You've made this question harder. Earlier you were talking about 3.
Okay, you can take 3. It
No. I think one's better. I think one is a bigger test for.
This is why Toby is the consummate businessman. He's negotiating with
you can't choose your favorite children, as your father couldn't choose.
Yeah.
But you have to choose your favorite watch.
I mean, for absolutely sure, it wouldn't be the one that has the highest commercial value. With a bit of luck, I can earn the money again and buy it. I think it would be for sure a watch that has a real meaning to me. It could be the Rolex Daytona with a presentation inscription that Livia offered me in 2013 before our Daytona auction. That really was there in a crucial moment in my life, that also accompanied both of us through a sabbatical into new adventure, this amazing project here with Phillips. I think that watch has, whether you call it karma or it has good vibes, it's just been with me in key moments, and that was probably the one I would grab.
I think that's a good decision.
If I was in that, hopefully never to see situation.
Yeah, hopefully, Wei will be there to help you carry everything out.
I'm a volunteer fireman as well, so.
Do you want to answer the question?
Sure.
And then, if you don't, we can go to the audience, and if they have questions.
Well, I mean, the watch that I'm wearing on my wrist it's an interesting story because I went through a whole sort of emotional, sort of struggle related to it. I had noticed, you guys were probably aware that Patek had the London exhibition watches. This wasn't exhibited, so I didn't even know of its existence. It's a 5970, which is my favorite movement in it, the Lemania 2310. It's one of the beautiful watches that I can think of as well. It was Thierry Stern's sort of like trial by fire to see whether or not he'd be worthy of the reins of Patek. So he essentially designed that watch, and I think he did an extraordinary job. I mean, there's many, many beautiful Patek perpetuals. There's the 1518, the 2499, the 3970, but the 5970 to me is just amazing. So apparently they made 3 of these watches with these bronze dials on them, and I learned about this watch because Nick Fowkes has one, who wrote the Patek book. So about a year and a half ago, I asked a friend of mine who works at Patek, do you think I could purchase one of these? And the thing is with Patek is you ask, and then you never ask again because you don't want to like upset them or you don't want to like be kind of, you know. So I have, you know, I'm traveling all the time, and I go through all this struggle with jet lag. I'm you know, seated on my Eames lounge in wine country, which is just my nickname for my chair, drinking wine, trying to sort of get into the right frame of mind to go to sleep and to overcome my jet lag. And I check my texts, and the gentleman who was the liaison with says that Thierry has decided to allocate you the last of these watches, which meant I couldn't sleep for the next 6 days. I'm running around the apartment, you know, pouring champagne on myself on my Dachshund, you know, like doing all kinds of dances. But I remember, you know, and again, I'm almost 50 years old. I remember when I went to Geneva to get that watch, and I've had a couple of different watches. I was trembling. Like I was like, and then I went through this whole thing. Do I deserve this watch? Am I worthy of it? Will I live up to the ownership that's required of the responsibility of owning something so extraordinary? And as I don't have any children, who's going to get it? You know, and so all this is flashing through my mind at the time. And it was interesting because I had a white gold version of this watch, which I never wore because I never felt I was ready for it. And I remember when I got this piece, I just put it on immediately, and I wear it all the time, you know, and it's become that companion piece, and it's also been a benchmark. I'm about to turn 50 next year. I've tried to do whatever I could in my business. I've probably failed quite miserably. I'm relatively incompetent in pretty much everything I do, but I was lucky enough to get this watch. So
That's great.
So in the fire, I'm going for that one.
So the short follow-up to that is, who's going to get the watch then?
I don't know.
The Dachshund?
I mean, if you really don't know what to do with it, I didn't even say what.
I guess we can, unless Toby, you want to chime in on
What the watch
your
I'm going
house
to
is
save.
burning down? Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you should be involved.
I should be involved, right? Yeah. I would say that I'd pick a watch I bought, which is not special at all, when my daughter was born, which is an IWC pilot's watch, and I'd save it because I bought it when my first daughter was born. But the reality is, at the moment, I've got a Vacheron Constantin on loan, and it's about $50,000. So I think I'd probably save that because
Otherwise, you're going to have to write a check.
Because I don't want to write a check to Vacheron.
That's great.
Yes. I'd like to ask a question to Aurel, actually, because, you know, we had this wonderful dinner at Harry's Bar after the conference in London, and I was just told the most amazing and most romantic story about how you and Livia met each other and fell in love. And so my question would be, if you and Livia were to go on some romantic holiday, some wonderful vacation to sort of, you know, to really just, you know, spend some time with one another, how would you dress and what watch would you wear?
Thank you, Wei.
I was told specifically I was just not to ask this question. Sorry, Aurel.
Or I can give you an out if you want, and we could just go to the audience.
No, I mean, seriously. First of all, I really have to say I can count the romantic dinners on one or two hands. We're so often on the road. We're so often with friends, with clients. So these tete-a-tete have become really, really rare, and these are really special moments. We have a lovely daughter. Of course, she's as part of the family, but the romantic part is different with her. If we're really alone, I think it would be, first of all, a very casual dinner. Mm-hmm. I don't think Liv and I ever dressed up in super formal wear to go into some gourmet restaurant. I think the true luxury is when it's comfortable.
Yes.
And the same with watches. I think there are amazing watches, but you feel exactly as stiff as if you are wearing your uber formal wear.
Yes.
So on a really cozy, romantic, casual dinner, it would be the most comfortable watch to wear. Now that could be a 5711 Nautilus that I think just touching it is sensual and comfortable. It could be any light, not too bulky, not too heavy watch. I love the weight of a full platinum watch, but sometimes when you reach the 300 or so grams, it's like when you want to toast, you're like... So comfort is probably
Yes.
the first criteria.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir.
There you go. He rose to the task.
Okay, on that note, if there's questions in the audience, we'll entertain you. Anybody? All right, there you go.
Well, just to play on the last question, I think that when choosing a watch, I think before, fall in love with the watch as a whole. But when you're going in, you're committed emotionally to buying a watch, whether it's vintage or new watch. What are the criteria for both of you in terms of what you would respond to or what's important to you, whether it be the metal or it could be brand, or is there something that, and also why? Because I think that's the sort of excitement that we as a person is interested in.
May I?
Yeah.
I think it's got to look cool, But so, for example, I love Lemani 2310 chronographs, right? And I love all the Speedmasters that have that watch up into the 145.01267, which I think was the last one with the 321 in it. I love all the Pateks that have that. I love the 5970, the 5070, the 3970. I think they're beautifully executed. But for example, one watch that a lot of people overlook were the early Roger Dubuis homage chronographs, which have that movement in it and so beautifully executed. And Roger, when he first started his own brand, it was almost as if he was like the sexy Latin cousin of Patek, And when he created those watches, not only were they Geneva sealed watches movements, but they were also certificate from Besançon as chronometers as well. So the substance and my point is that people are taking the same ébauche, but they're communicating it into different ways, right? And the way that Roger communicated it was just so beautiful. And when I looked at it, it was cool looking. It was instinctive. Just fell in love with it. In the same way where I look at a Speedmaster with a 321 in it, I look at it in that history, that all the watches that were certified by NASA had that movement in it, and all the watches that went to the moon had that movement in it. Or if I look at a Patek chronograph that has that, the most venerable of all the chronograph movements in that as well. And let's not forget Vacheron and Breguet, who also have that movement in it as well. Or if you look at a 5004, when I look at the 5004 with that 2310 in it and think to myself that, because I remember I had this amazing lunch where Philippe Stern was seated next to me, and he said, that movement was never meant to be a split-second chronograph, and it was the biggest headache for us to figure out how to make it into a split-second chronograph, and finally we had to create an isolator mechanism, which everyone in Patek speak refers to as the octopus. But if you think about that movement and its incredible history, that would be a way of entering into watches, and yeah, they have to be cool looking also.
Did everyone follow that?
I hope everyone came to talk reference numbers.
You sort of lost.
If you have any reference number questions, see Wei after the panel.
Yes. I mean, if I may just, it's a combination of your question and your answer. I mean, we spoke a lot tonight about wearability, comfort, what it means to a wearer. I mean, many things we hear these days is, if I buy this watch today, how much is it going to be worth in 6 months? So the financial aspect. This is something we haven't been discussing 25 years ago, understandably, because even a great Patek perpetual chronograph was $50,000 or $80,000. Today you add 1 0, maybe even more. We have not discussed much about rarity. We have not discussed much about the complexity of a movement, meaning how much engineering went into that, calibers, etc. Well, you did. I didn't that much. And I mean, that all goes into what is a collector anyway. I personally don't think I'm a collector. And I don't know if you consider yourself a collector. The collector, to me, the word collector, I think of the guys who have like 500 insects in sort of these glass boxes, and he goes to the jungle to look for another butterfly or another bug. Today's collectors are, I think, mostly just enjoying themselves. I think I have more ties than watches, but I'm not a tie collector. So why so volume definitely is not the criteria. Is it because I just consider ties necessities and watches a pleasure? Maybe. Is it because I have more money tied in watches than in ties? I don't know. So what is actually this whole thing of having 1 watch, 2 watch, 5, 10, 20, 50? And why do we make such a big story out of it? And I think deep inside, it's driven by the emotional connection that we have, that something about each watch fascinates us, and it can be any of those aspects we mentioned. Just the fact that I know I'm the only one who has that model in white gold or that model with black dial. It's another topic for another evening. Why do we actually collect all that? It's certainly not just to have a watch to go with my blue jacket or green trousers.
Excellent.
Sorry, had to be said.
So, Lee, do you want to add something to that?
Well, I wasn't. I mean, I can't talk to the same sort of extent that you both have. But if the question is, what makes a watch attractive to me, I'd probably draw on an example from the auction tomorrow, which is the Tourneck Rayville. Now, I love Blancpain 50 Fathoms, and the reason I love them is I just love the visual aspect, because I think that the fat bezel sort of artificially or maybe in actual fact makes the dial smaller, so it creates a completely different dimension, and it's a completely unique dive watch. And then I discovered the story about those Tourneck watches and how the US Navy were not allowed to use a non-US brand, but they kept testing all of the watches, and the Blancpain was like by far the best one and the only one that wasn't breaking. So then the importer, Tourneck, brought them in, put his stamp on it, did a Villeray, put a play on the Villeray, which is where Blancpain is based. And, so for me, 2 things. Firstly, the design element, and secondly, the story. And that's
Yes.
I love those kinds of things.
Yes.
So no idea about the movement in there, got no idea, and but tomorrow, if I find I've got sort of a spare $70,000 I'll put my hand up.
Can I add one last thing to that?
Yes,
Because we haven't spoken about clothing throughout this entire evening. and I guess one of the things that attracts me to watches also is what attracts me to clothing. In the early 90s, in Staten Island, of the most unlikely sort of places, which is, if anyone's ever been...
Sartorial hotbed of Staten Island.
Is there anyone here from Staten Island? It's not the coolest place in the world, and yet somehow it produced the most sort of seminal rap band of the 90s, which is Wu-Tang Clan, right? And when you look at or you listen to documentaries about how Wu-Tang Clan came about, it was basically these guys were from Staten Island. They wanted to create a sound that was completely different from, and a structure of rapping that was completely different from any other rap band that existed at the time. And when the first, when 36 Chambers came out, it was mind-blowing. And when you listen to the RZA, for example, explaining what it was that was compelling about that, he said, we were making it for ourselves, right? We were making that as an expression of who we are. And I think that if you talk about tailoring, for example, if you talk about Lorenzo Schiafanelli, for example, he's creating a style that he wants to wear, that it's pleasing to him. And I think in the case of the best watches as well, whether it be a Dufour Simplicity or it be a Gento watch, which incidentally, was created from one specific person's perspective. My point being, whether it's in tailoring or clothing, or whether it's in watches or in music, if a whole bunch of a committee gets around the table and says we need to create something cool, you'll never create something good, right? But if an individual with a dream and a passion and some talent can, right? And that's what I think is interesting in all those fields.
Absolutely. That was well said. And I never thought Wu-Tang was going to come up this evening. But I'm happy it did.
Bring the motherfucker.
We'll see you all tomorrow for the auction. Thank you for your interest and for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you. That was great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you very much.
Is that Michael? Cheers.
Thank you, sir. Sir.
Michael.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh.